Hi, my name is Guy Lawrence and thanks for tuning into my podcast today. If you're enjoying these conversations and you want to check out more of this transformational work, be sure to come back to guylawrence.com.au and join me as we go further down the rabbit hole. Enjoy the show. Well, we'll get on with the show, Scott. Scott, welcome to the podcast, mate.
Thanks for having me back. I think I spoke to you like 3 years ago when you were part of a different podcast.
That's right. Yes, a lot has changed since then, and a lot of exploring this work that you're writing about allowed me to find more deeper parts of myself. And you know what? I want to explore that more. And I stepped into the unknown and continued on that journey. So you're probably a contribution to that, mate, with your work.
Oh, good. So I'm expecting like lots of ice baths and like stupid, possibly dangerous adventures.
Exactly, mate.
Right.
So first of all, how is isolation treating you out there? How are you doing on the day of your book launch as well? I feel honored to be a part of this live broadcast today, mate.
I know, it's funny. This has been like the most stressful book launch I've ever had. Like everything that went wrong could go wrong did go wrong. But I believe it's sorted out now. You can actually buy the book. For a while, it was listed as out of stock and then out of print and all sorts of horrible things. But I think we're doing really well now. And I don't know, like it's pretty cool. Like it says rocketed up the audiobook charts. It's at like 500 in Audible today, which is just bananas. I'm probably not going to make any sense. I had about 45 minutes of sleep last night. And I'm just ready to go. I'm using the Wedge in order to stay calm and power right through.
Yeah, brilliant. Well, look, I'm so glad you reached out to me, mate, because what you're writing about in the Wedge is right up my alley. I love everything you're discussing in the book, and I really hope more people look into this work because it's so powerful and so needed, especially in a time like this as well, where we can learn to overcome ourselves in so many different ways. But what I'm curious with, Scott, is which would be great, is to maybe give us a brief history of, because you said this is your fourth book. And I know there's been a journey leading on into each one that led you to this point today. So maybe could you give us a bit of a recap of all of that?
Sure. Yeah. So it all started for me because I'm an anthropologist by training. I dropped out of a PhD program in like 2006, I think, in order to pursue journalism. And one of the first books that I wrote was a sort of a very mainstream journalism book about organ trafficking, where I was looking at people who buy and sell human body parts. And it's called The Red Market. It sort of established me as like sort of this serious journalism guy. And then my second book was called The Enlightenment Trap, which is really where the journey to the Wedge begins, which is essentially, to sum it up in one line, it's like how meditation can kill you. It looks at several cases of people who have died on their spiritual journeys, usually trying to get superpowers, people who are like really, really into the meditative experience, and something went wrong, and then really, really tragic things occur. I found like 100 people in insane asylums up in India every year who think that they've become Krishna or Vishnu. And then I witnessed a friend of mine die on a meditation retreat where I actually had to return her body to the United States. And then I told the story about a guy named Ian Thorson who was stabbed and then starved to death on a mountain in Arizona. And that was what the plot of The Enlightenment Trap is. So the reason I'm telling you this is because it pretty much frames what happened when I met Wim Hof. I was the guy who debunks false gurus, false spirituality, and I had this assignment from Playboy to go meet Wim in Poland in 2011, like January 2011. And Wim is this like guy who like hangs out in his underpants on glaciers, and he told people that he could teach anyone to do it and then control their immune system and do all this stuff that sounded like it was bananas. And I thought he was basically saying, meditate your way to superpowers, and he was going to get people killed. And so I took a commission from Playboy magazine to go debunk him before he got famous. And then what happened is I tried his method, and it turns out it works. In 1 week, I was doing all the same stuff that he was doing. I was meditating on the banks of icy lakes and this melting the snow around me with my body heat. I climbed a mountain in my underwear, just like Wim. And I was like, well, crap, I guess this works. And I wrote this big article in Playboy about it. And Wim is now super, super famous. Not totally because of me. It's because he does really amazing things. But I was one of the first guys to write about him. And that became the book, What Doesn't Kill Us? About my journeys with Wim, about, what is it about sitting in this really stressful environment, which is ice water. He makes you sit in ice water for long periods of time. What is it about sitting in that and then controlling yourself in that environment that allows you to generate resilience, allows you to do the crazy superhuman sounding things that Wim does? That was what Doesn't Kill Us was about. And at the end of that book, I climbed up Mount Kilimanjaro in my bathing suit. It was negative 30 degrees out. I did it really, really fast. And I wasn't comfortable, but I made it to the top. And then the question sort of occurs to me while I'm up there is, the two things. One, I had like the most cockamamie, cheesy thought ever in my whole life enters my head, is that I am not on the mountain. I am the mountain, right? It's like, it's like something that should like show up on like a gift card somewhere, like a t-shirt. I am the mountain. But I had this like feeling of oneness, that I was actually part of the environment, and that my sensations of the environment are really just about connecting to the outside world. And that I got there by connection, not by forcing my way up this mountain. And in What Doesn't Kill Us, I have a chapter called The Wedge, where I say, you can put yourself between stimulus and response. There is this space that you can generate. And I'm talking about in ice water in that book. But I wanted to find out all of the other ways you can put yourself between stimulus and response, and how that can make you do pretty cool things. And that is where the wedge comes from. And I'm going to just put this on the screen.
Beautiful cover, by the way.
Oh, thank you.
And there you go, right up to that point. It's interesting. I spent a week with Wim back in 2015. And I'm not sure about you and your circumstances, but I had no idea what I was letting myself in for. I knew I was going to do some breathing. I knew I was going to do some cold exposure, but I just didn't appreciate the intensity of that week, which was incredible, which is a pivoting point. When you were going there to debunk him, like for me, the first thing I thought, wow, Scott must have a certain amount of humility to be able to go there and just go, you know what, I was wrong. Because it sounded like at the time you were kind of convinced he was just another false guru.
Well, I think that whenever you go into writing a story, whenever I go into writing a story, I carry two opposing thoughts in my head. I keep the skeptical side of myself, but I also keep the I'm willing to try anything part of myself. And I think that's a very important thing to have, because you need to stay rational, right? Like if you hang out with Wim, if you listen to Wim, you know he is not a rational person. He is like, his mind flies all over the place. He says things that are cockamamie, and you're like, and if you just went with him and you said, I want to be Wim, you are a crazy person too. And so, but I feel like there is something about being skeptical and being like, look, I don't know if this is going to work. And then at the same time being like, but as long as it's not going to kill me, I'm going to try it. And so it's these two opposing sort of impulses in me that I think make me pretty well suited for writing these sorts of books, is that I can go into an environment, I can try it out. And, when I was writing The Wedge, there were 3 or 4 things that I did try out. And then I was like, nah, it doesn't work. Let's move on to the next subject. And I think that is like a very honest and useful way to start getting involved in this stuff.
Got it. Okay. So why the wedge? Why the terminology, the wedge? What does it mean to you and for everyone listening today?
So it started in ice water, and it happened, but it happens everywhere. I think that the wedge is like actually a fundamental human ability that we all develop from birth, when our body is like just a jumble of flesh, and you're a brain in that body trying to figure out how to use the flesh, because you're looking down at it and you don't know what an arm is, but somehow through the magic of neural connection and also whatever your mind is doing. And that's really important. It's not just neural connections. It's whatever you're thinking and experiencing. You gain control of your body. And when I was in the ice water, you jump into this ice bath and you can just think, what's it like to be in an ice bath? And you're going to clench up, like your butt's going to go like this, and your back's going to tense up. And you know what ice water is like. It's that clenching feeling. And what Wim says is sit in that ice water and relax. Do the opposite of what your body wants to do. And I promise you won't die. And lo and behold, it works. And what you're doing is you're putting something. Is it your intention? Is it your mind? Is it your sensations? I don't know what it is, so I called it a wedge. You're pushing this thing in between that stimulus and that response that your body has. And you're opening up space. And so I see the wedge as either, creating space between stimulus and response, or sometimes as removing that space so that it's automatic. So something that you usually do think about, you can make it so that it just happens. And that's really how the concept of the wedge is. And sometimes I think that it's a really apt metaphor. And sometimes I'm like, well, what is the metaphor? But it is about this idea of trying to sort of gain control of yourself, and that thing that you're doing is very important. And in the ice water, it's not clenching up, because the automatic response is to clench. And I think that response, in some ways, you can think of it as coming from the stimulus. Another place you can think about the wedge is, let's say you have a sneeze coming on. Okay, you're about to sneeze. You're like, your nose is doing, what is it? Pain? Is it tickle? I don't even know how to describe whatever that pre-sneeze feeling is, but you know it's coming. And then you say, all right, I'm not going to do it, or I'm going to slow it down. And you do something, right? What is it you do? That thing that you do to slow down or stop the sneeze is the wedge. But you can do that in everything.
Yeah, no, beautiful. I mean, from me ice bathing once a week now for probably 4 years plus.
Oh, awesome.
Yeah. I can relate to that. And what's been wonderful transition for me is how, like you say, it comes into everyday life. Because if you can get in this moment of surrender and almost being like a third party presence to what's actually going on, you kind of rise above the noise of everything that's there and send a very different signal to the body. And it's been a beautiful practice to then bring that into even times like now, where you get to observe the sensations of the body more and start to almost interrupt the patterns that can grip you and hold you in any given moment.
Right. I mean, and the idea behind this is, we evolved in really harsh environments. We evolved as Homo sapiens 300,000 years ago. Plains of Africa, lions everywhere, temperatures that are constantly fluctuating, and starvation and non-starvation, like booms and busts. And what the thing is about that is that variation in your threats were constant. So your body was always adjusting, and you didn't have the technology to insulate yourself, really. I mean, there was some fire and stuff, but you didn't have laptops, right? And then we fast forward to as the years tick forward, we now have like absolute control of our environment, and we stay in a static place most of the time. We keep our temperature the same. We have constant food supply, a huge variety of tastes available to us. All of these things that just didn't exist in our Paleolithic past, even though we still have those Paleolithic bodies. And in terms of stress, when you saw a tiger, you dumped adrenaline, you dumped cortisol, you dumped all these like energy-inducing, pain-numbing hormones in your body so that you could fight the lion. I mean, you'd probably lose, but you tried and you beat up that lion, and then you passed on your genes later. Nowadays, we stress out about all sorts of things. Like today, I was stressing out about my book, right? I was like, the book is not connecting. and this is going to ruin my career, blah blah blah, all that stuff that you think about when something existential is happening. But my wife was actually really funny today. She was like, Scott, you didn't swear at all today. I was expecting a storm. And I'm like, yeah, like it's out of my control. And I think of it as I was using the wedge there. I was like, I don't have the ability to actually go crazy here. And I was trying to like modulate my response to this stress. And whereas normally what happens is you have some sort of snafu on the internet, and then you get really angry. It all turns inside. And the reason you're angry is because you don't have a physical outlet, right? If it was a lion, you'd stab the lion. And that was your physical outlet. So that cortisol meant something. But instead, you release the adrenaline, you release the cortisol, you release all that stuff, but there's no outlet. And that results in anxiety. It results in depression. It results in autoimmune illnesses. And so a lot of what the wedge is about is trying to find different environments that give me that release and then allow me to control that release. And then that generalizes to everyday life.
Yeah, amazing summary, mate. Amazing. I was when I took a look at your book, and looked at all the different areas of exploration to get the feedback for that response, where you're putting yourself in these wedge places of all different kind of stimuli around the world and stuff. Where I was really fascinated to see on the opening of the book that you are the universe.
Yeah.
Can you explain why?
So yeah, this is it's like another one of those like cheesy T-shirt lines, right? You are the universe.
No, I loved it personally. I thought it'd be a good place for you to talk about. For sure.
So I mean, obviously I embrace it, but I am also sort of like, I am this dualist person. I'm like, that's weird. And then I also am embracing it. And I think that the thing is, when I'm on top of that mountain, right, and I am feeling connected to things, I see like consciousness, who we are as people is not just bound by our bodies. Like who are you as a person? Are you a person because you end at your skin and you are immutable and you are just this thing that exists? Or are you here because of all of the relationships, all of the interactions that you've had your whole life, and those somehow feed into you, and then you also reflect those things out to you? And I think that when you are really cognizant of your sensations, and that there's just this continuum, right? Who would, like Alan Watts once said, who would you be without the sun? Right? He's talking about the same idea, and he's saying that ball of fusion molten hydrogen or whatever it's doing is somehow you, because it has donated all the energy to this world. It has allowed you to exist. And for you to even conceive of yourself as not part of it is ridiculous. And so that's a really big way to think of it. Another way to think of it is, so I climbed up to Mount Kilimanjaro. It was cold. It was -30. My nipples were out, and they were just like out there. And I'm thinking, I am on the top of this mountain. But yet inside my body, there's a lot of other stuff going on. And if you think about, like, for instance, your gut bacteria, you know that if you like clean out your gut bacteria or put different gut bacteria, you'll be depressed, right? Or you'll be anxious. And we all know there's this gut-brain connection. There are inner worlds inside your body that are responding to external stimulus. Like, I'm on top of Mount Kilimanjaro, but my mitochondria are also on top of Mount Kilimanjaro, but they experience it as that wash of adrenaline and cortisol and the unique mix of hormones that I'm throwing in at them. So in a way, I'm a lens for those bacteria, for those mitochondria to be out in the world. And in a way, I see, those things are sensing their environment. They're sensing the hormonal cocktails that I'm putting into the bloodstreams. So their environment's changing as my external environment changes. And I see all of this sort of like nested, connected bits of consciousness that come through us. And who we think we are is not who we really are, because we're different people in different circumstances. I'm one person in an ice bath. I'm one person talking to my wife about intimate things. I'm another person banging angry tweets on the internet about my president. Like you're actually a different person in all of these contexts. And I think that's really important to realize, because the linchpin between those different people are sensations. And if you're aware of your sensations, then you're aware of who you are.
Yeah, it's so important. We all coexist in this universe. Like I said, there's no getting away from that. And there's definitely a natural law and order that happens, a rhythm of life. And we're so stuck in our heads for the majority of the time. And we've kind of haven't embodied so many different experiences anymore, where you're talking about those tactile experiences that can come in and be our teacher and start to teach us something new, so we can have a different perspective on life and feel reconnected to everything around us as well, and start to have a different relationship with it. It's fascinating stuff. I was interested as well, Scott, with your because you talk about the ice bath, right, where you get in and there's this extreme sensory experience that you have to overcome yourself and surrender and breathe into those moments in that wedge. But then you looked at the opposite end of the spectrum of sensory deprivation, where you just do nothing. What did you find from doing that as well?
So yeah, a lot of the book is putting me into like really intense situations, right, and seeing how my body responds. But then the obvious question is what happens if you're able to take the body out of its context? What is there? And when you go into a sensory deprivation tank, or the better word is a float tank for it, that is essentially very salty water that is so dense that the human body will float on top of it. They make it very dark, and it's about as close as you can get to isolating your body from sensation that is possible, right? You can't just take your brain out of your body and put it in a jar somewhere, right? You have to isolate your sensations in some way. So in this environment, what happens is you turn inwards, right? You've extracted the environment, but your brain is still, your brain can only sense the world through your sensory pathways, right? If you think about it, your brain is actually in a float tank in your head. And the only way it knows anything about the world is by the signals, the chemical and electrical signals that rocket through your peripheral nervous system, your eyes, your ears, your nose, your skin, up your spinal cord and into your into its like gray fleshy matter. So what you learn in the float tank is that your body is an environment, and you start attuning into your heartbeat, into your blood pressure, into the creaks of my 41-year-old joints. Like you suddenly become aware of what's inside, and it forces you into essentially an automatic meditation. And for me, I mean, it's very relaxing. It's introspective. I feel like you can do a lot of like internal work here. But another thing that it's really good for are people who are suffering from post-traumatic stress disorder, people who have anxiety disorder, and people who have depression. So I went to Tulsa, Oklahoma, where there's this world-renowned float tank research place where they're looking at the effects of anxiety and depression on people who, they're looking at float tanks on people who have anxiety and depression. And what happens is if you're in a moment of trauma, let's say you're a soldier in Afghanistan or whatever, right? We'll do the apocryphal soldier. He's walking down the street. Everything's hunky-dory. There's like tea around, and there's a certain quality of light, children playing in the background, some traffic noise. It's a nice day. Walking down the street, and then all of a sudden, boom, explosion. He's thrown to the ground. His buddy's dead. He's looking at his like wounds. He can hear his heart beating in his ears. His breathing is suddenly elevated. What happens in that moment is all of the previous seconds get bonded in what I'm terming a neural symbol in your brain. So, and this sort of forms, neural symbols are like the fundamental unit of cognition in a way. And I thought it sort of skipped describing what those are, but essentially all of those moments get wired into your brain. And so that calmness of the environment is now bonded sort of forever with the trauma that you're experiencing. And then and for many people, it's the first time they feel their heartbeat. It's the first time they're really aware of their blood pressure. It's the first time all of these things suddenly come up. And then fast forward to when they're at home, right? They're walking through the grocery store or whatever, their heartbeat's still going, and they may not perceive it, right, consciously, but their body can perceive it. There may be a quality of light out there that's going on that's somehow similar to the quality of light before the explosion. And what happens is when you're in a float tank, you're able to like shut off all of those external stresses. You're able to look inside and be like, oh, that's actually not a traumatic event. And you're able to subtly rewire your brain so that you don't have these sort of random attacks in your experience. And yeah, what is so fascinating is the guy who's doing this, his name's Justin Feinstein. You can look him up on Google Scholar or whatever. He showed that I think he had 30 or 40 people with severe anxiety, put them in float tanks, and did questionnaires before and after, and then like a month afterwards. And he showed 100% improvement across all of his cases. Is that actually just going into a float tank for an hour was better than being on antidepressants. Wow. And that's really, really powerful. That's really crazy to think that just by modulating your environment, you can change the way your responses are. And the reason for that is because changing your environment also changes your chemical pathways, right? Like if I'm in a different environment, my chemical pathways that send things to my brain are different, therefore your brain will change. Whereas a drug, they're just trying to change your chemical pathways directly. The wedge allows you to do sort of a more, I guess, natural way to sort of get similar outcomes in many cases.
Yeah, no, it's amazing when you think about it, isn't it? Because we're always looking externally, whether to suppress a feeling or change a feeling, and we're constantly doing that. And this gives us an opportunity to look inward and actually turn that awareness from the outward inward and start to have a relationship with the body and give literally the homeostasis to a chance to recalibrate.
Yes.
I was fascinated by the neurosymbols because I think I heard you speak about it as well, that it's literally because of the symbolization, our body is living in the past. So every symbol that's coming in is triggering a past response, if I'm not mistaken. Would that be
yeah.
way to put it?
Yeah. Yeah, let me describe that because people are probably like, what the fuck are you talking about?
Yeah, no, it's great.
So here's how your body senses stuff. Remember, your brain's floating in a float tank in your head, right? Yeah. And the only way it has ever been able to experience the world from birth is through those sensory pathways. So let's look at how sensation gets into your brain in the first place. So again, let's go to an ice bath. Let's say this is the very first time you've experienced an ice bath. You jump in there, and in a fraction of a millisecond, the signal goes from your peripheral nerves up through to your spine, up that central channel, into the lowest part of your brain, your lizard brain, the limbic system. And I like to think of the limbic system as sort of a library. And there's a librarian in every library. So this librarian gets the signal and is like, cool. And the shelves of her library are every other sensation you've ever had. And she looks at all the shelves and is like, nope, never had this experience before. No idea what this sensation is. All she knows is that it has a loud volume because ice baths have a very, very loud volume. So she kicks it over to what is called the paralimbic system, which is right next door. And you can think of the paralimbic system as like a book binder. And so she shuttles it over to this thing. It's like, it's right there. And the paralimbic system looks at this and says, oh, look, I've got this new sensation. It's ice water. I'm going to identify what this means, because it was just data before, by bonding it with your current emotional state. So in ice water, for a number of reasons that, because, if you're jumping in ice water, you've had previous experiences before that it has already been shaped a little bit, but it's unmitigated horror and terror, right? Ice baths are horrible, right? And so it's like, okay, unmitigated horror and terror, kicks it back down to the limbic librarian. She's like, cool, ice bath, horror and terror. And she files it away under ice bath. It's that sensation. Now, this is very important. Fast forward to the next time you go into an ice bath. The sensation rockets up through your body, goes into the limbic librarian. She says, "Oh, look, I have this book." And she says, "This is unmitigated horror and terror." And she kicks it off and you go live your experience. What this means is she pulled that old book off the shelf, which was your prior emotional state, which means every time you experience any sensation, you're experiencing that first book binding. You're not experiencing the present moment. Now, you have to think about neural symbols. They're not just ice baths. They're not just big events. You're feeling 100 million things right now. You have an emotional state that's right now, some sort of tone in your emotion. You're feeling air pressure. You're seeing light. You're sweating or you're not sweating. You feel dry. You feel cracked. You have tons of sensations going right now, and they're all being constantly wired or referenced to previous things. And there's a sort of back and forth that's going between your past and your present all of the time. But it's only when you have a novel sensation or you're doing something weird, like forcing a new emotion, that you have the chance to change things, that you have the chance to create new symbols. So a lot of what we're doing in the Wedge is filling up shelves with experiences so that that limbic librarian doesn't just have one book to choose, Unmitigated Horror and Terror, but 12 other books. And if you've done an ice bath, you know that you're standing in front of an ice bath right now and you do not want to jump in. I don't care how many ice baths you've done.
Correct.
You're like, no, I don't want to do it. It's terrible. But you also, and that's that first symbol. You're never going to get rid of it. It's on the shelf. But you also know that you've had great experiences because of it. You've had this huge joy that comes out of an ice bath because you've sort of psyched yourself out. So you now have a wider vocabulary because you've experienced it more and more.
Got it. Great analogy. So what you're saying then is that if you're willing to put yourself in different experiences and different explorations, like you have been doing with the Wedge, and you're creating this limbic library of different artifacts that you can pull out instead of just the one that means horror and terror every single time.
Right.
That means that we can carry it into our everyday life. And then when we have a situation that we could relate, like COVID-19 or different things that are coming on, automatic response is normally the one filing cabinet, horror or terror. But now we've got an array in our toolkit that we can call upon.
Yes.
Would that be a fair estimation?
Yeah, I mean, it's bewilderingly complex because a neural symbol, you should think of it sort of like a bit or a byte in a computer program, right? It's like a 1 or a 0, and it's sort of meaningless on its own. It only makes sense when there's thousands and thousands of these 1s and 0s sort of operating in context. But that's like the fundamental neural hardware. But what happens is the more you do things, the better you become at doing things. Because if your library is narrow and you stay in your narrow band of comfort in your homeostatic nice house, and like you never go out and try new things, it becomes harder for you to get over your limbic librarian doesn't want to let you go do things, right? She's like, oh no, I only have 7 books that I'm dealing with here, and these are my main emotional responses. And so no, that going for a jog down the streets, terrifying because I've never been outside before. So it's like you become better at doing more things the more you do them, the more you put yourself, especially in situations that are stressful, in situations that are novel and difficult. And then you're able to show yourself, because in that process of being in a difficult situation and then finding that you're competent in it is actually interpreted as joy usually, right? It's like, I did something really hard and then, it turned out okay. You have this new emotional response, joy, that wires in a new neural symbol. And then you feel expansive and you've actually expanded who you are as a person, because we only become real when we're under stress, right? If you're a blob of jello on your couch, you're not really a person. You're just a blob of jello on your couch. The more you go out and act in the world, the more person-y you get, right? The more human you are.
Yeah, totally. It's like you get inertia, but you got to get that momentum going, What, with all the things that you've tried within the book that you've explored, what surprised you the most?
Oh man, I'm surprised. You know what it is? I am so surprised that my wife came along with me for like all of this stuff. That is what it is. Is that if there's one real hero on the book, it's not me, it's my wife, who we do the saunas. We've done the ice baths. We do this thing where we throw kettlebells back and forth. And what's really interesting and very important to see is that she reacts differently to these stimuli. She's a different person. She'll have a different reaction. She'll have a different way to modulate her responses. And so the surprising thing, and something to note, is that this is not a book saying, here are the 10 ways to get super awesome, right? These are the 10 techniques you do to be awesome. It's more like, here's 10 techniques that worked really well for me and worked pretty good for Laura. But everyone's experience is going to be different, but we're all using the same wedge. We're all going through the same encounter with our stresses and our sensory system.
Yeah, right. Did you have to drag her along kicking, or was she like, no, I want to do this? And what did it do for your relationship going through all these different things together?
It made it stronger. It definitely made it stronger to do. I mean, we've always had a pretty good relationship, I'll say, but certainly doing difficult things with your partner and then finding that you've come out better for it is better for your relationship, right? Doing things and failing at them and then yelling at each other is not useful. I mean, it's always going to matter on the dynamic. One of the really cool things that I've done, we do this thing where we throw kettlebells, and everyone it's the same wedge, because everyone who heard the words "throw kettlebell" now thought to themselves, "You're going to break your foot," right? I mean, everyone thought that. Where you have two people and you're passing this lump of iron back and forth. And the first time I did it, I was looking at the roots of fear with a guy named Andrew Huberman at Stanford, who's a neuroscientist. Okay. And he had this thing where you swim with virtual sharks in a virtual shark tank using a VR glasses. And it's supposed to provoke fear in some people, but for me, it didn't do it. And I wanted to be in that fearful stimulus and then control that stimulus to find the wedge. But the stimulus wasn't strong enough. Like, I could care less about the virtual shark. So I was a little bummed when I was walking out of his lab. And I got this message from my friend, Tony. And Tony said, "Scott, you got to go meet my friend, Michael Castrogiovanni, who throws kettlebells at you to put you into a flow state," which is like, to me, that was like just gobbledygook. Like, what? You throw kettlebells to do a flow state. Kettlebells to me sounded lame, and throwing them sounded dangerous, which is sort of similar to how I first felt about Wim Hof. I'll have you know. So I was like, sure, let's go do it. And I go meet Michael, and he's like, picture Michael for all intents and purposes he is a gorilla, right? He is okay. Shorter than me, but huge. Like his thighs are as big as my arms. He's hunched over, butt out. He might as well have his fist dragging on the ground. I mean, this guy's big, and we're faced off against each other, and he's going to throw the kettlebell at me, and I have to catch it. And I know that this is what we're supposed to do: throw and catch the kettlebell. But it's freaky, right? Like a dude you don't know with a lump of iron, you're faced off against them. I mean, that's like sort of a violent. We're wired to think that's violent, and there's the real threat of hurting myself. So he does this thing. There's a ritual at the beginning of it where you look at each other's eyes and you say, okay. And he does 3 swings. On the first swing, you're supposed to look at each other's eyes. On the second swing, it's up here. And then you're supposed to switch your gaze from each other's eyes to the kettlebell. And this is very important. And on the third swing, he lets go. And it's flipping through the air like a mad piece of iron. And again, my butt puckers up. But I'm laser-like focused on that kettlebell, and my hands grab it, and I put it through my legs, I swing, and I pass it right back. And all of a sudden, we go from this thing where I'm thinking, oh, there's danger, or I'm going to get hurt, to basically dancing with this guy. Because the actual movement is not very difficult. You can learn it in 15 minutes, how to throw a kettlebell. But because the threat is real, you can really break your foot with a kettlebell. It forces you to focus. And by both of you being forced to focus on this external object, your movements coordinate automatically. So these 2 separate people are now coordinating because of the stress that they put between them. And this is an instantaneous flow state. You're not thinking about your actions, you're just moving. Now, what's really cool, this is why I want to bring Laura up again. When couples do this, right? When you have a guy and a girl doing it, everyone's relationship has little islands that you don't want to go to, right? Like these little places that are, you know, you don't want to talk about. It's just not a place that we want to go. And even healthy relationships have these islands. That's fine. But usually these islands come up as like sort of trust problems. And when you're standing against your partner, usually partners suck at throwing kettlebells because they're worried. They're like, oh no, Scott's going to break my foot. Just like he, you know, whatever, he broke, you know, just like he stepped in my garden that one time in a bad way, like, you know, and these things sort of come out. And so then you learn to trust each other again in the context of kettlebells without words. It becomes a little bit of magic.
Yeah, wow. I've never heard of that. It's because it's not like kicking a football back and forth on the beach or something, because there's no danger, right? So you can't really, the fact that you got that laser focus, you're not going to be anywhere else except in that moment, which is really interesting. What weight kettlebell were you throwing around? You know,
I think that
something like 30 kilos.
I usually recommend for you know, don't
something
do too much at first.
Yeah, absolutely.
I mean, I throw a 25-pound weight usually with people. So in kg, that's 12.5 kg. That'll usually what I will use. But you know, what you don't want is one person to be like dying and the other person be like, this is super easy. You know, you want to have a weight that's. You also don't want too light of a weight, because if it's too light, it moves weird. But you know, I think 20, 25 is a great weight to start out at. But if you look at the guy who does this, Michael Castrogiovanni, when he gets with his other gorillas, you know, and they throw it, I've seen him, I think I've seen him throw 300-pound kettlebells, which is bananas.
Holy shit. I couldn't even pick that up. I don't think. Hello, throw it. My God.
No, I can't do that either. I mean, and honestly, it's probably a different exercise at that point. At that point, it becomes about being macho, right?
Yeah.
I got a bigger weight than you. I don't care about being macho. That's not my game. It's really about these flow states. And I find like a comfortable yet somewhat challenging weight is really what you should be aiming for.
Yeah, fair enough. Fair enough. There's one more question I wanted to ask you before I ask you some other ones. But I've got a few at the end just for you, mate. You know, I'll keep you in suspense. But and it jumped out of me in the book when I was looking through it. So I wanted to mention it because I really related to it. And you went to see Shaman Luzma. Is that have I pronounced his name correct? And
yeah, Luzma.
Luzma. And was that from an ayahuasca journey?
Yes.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
And he give you a mantra saying, she give you a mantra saying, I'm willing.
Yeah.
And I only want you to speak to that a little bit, because I did a shamanic journey back in 2013, and I was terrified of the surrender before going in. And the shaman there gave me a mantra, and he said, just say, I trust. I trust. Mm-hmm. I trust. And I did that. And it was the most powerful experience I had, because it really allowed me to 100%, not 99, not 98, just go all in and trust. But from that experience, it's allowed me to bring that trust back into my everyday life. Yes. Mm-hmm. And I was wondering how it went for you. Yeah.
Yeah, well, you found the wedge. You know, that's the thing. And so when I'm in the book, I sort of end it with the ayahuasca experience, and it is a bizarre experience. And I don't want to actually go into everything, because there's some really cool twists and turns in the book that I don't want to give away. But I do want to say is that as I am experiencing all of these different stresses coming into this experience, right? I've done sensory deprivation, I've done heat, I've done fear with kettlebells, I've done some chemical stuff where I did MDMA with my wife in a sort of psychiatric setting. I've really tried a lot of different ways to like have a big experience and then find a way to control myself in it. But ayahuasca is sort of like an even bigger one, because the ritual is like an 8-hour ritual. It involves sound. It involves eating a very bland diet. It involves, I went to Peru, so I'm in a very novel environment where everything is different. And you're really modulating like 5 or 6 different parts of the wedge all at once, 5 or 6 different big stimulus that have impacts on you. And you're on a chemical, which is, you know, it's not like a kettlebell where I could be like, Michael, I don't want to throw anymore. And he'd be like, all right, cool. Like, you've taken a drug and you are there for 8 hours. There's nothing you can do. So I think that people should only be called to do ayahuasca, because this is like, you know, it's not like everyone should do it. This is something that spoke to me and to you and to other people, but totally. It's a big event. But you're right. That mantra, I am willing, is what you have to do. It's just like with the kettlebell, right? The kettlebell's coming and you can fight it, but it's going to win, right? It's going to land on your foot. Or you can be like, I am in this practice. I am focused and I am here. I am in the moment. In the ice bath, it's the same thing. You're in the ice bath. It is stressful. And ayahuasca is not fun. It's super stressful and horrible in many ways, right? And then you're in that environment and you're controlling yourself. But it's not like, remember, we're the universe, right? It's not like your ego controlling it. It's more like saying, I am going to control my reactions. I'm going to ride this out and I'm going to be okay. And then the amazing thing about ayahuasca is, for most people experience it this way, is that it feels like it's an external entity to you, right? There's something that's coming at you. And for me, the first time I did ayahuasca, it was like someone just lecturing me about how lame I was. And it's like, Scott, you're lame in all these different ways. And it if you talk to the shamans, they'll tell you it is the spirit of the medicine. I'm fine with that interpretation. I'm also fine with it saying it shows a different way your psychology works. That's cool too. But it feels like there's something outside giving you a new perspective on your life. And that's that's actually the stress that you're working with. I'm not saying you're forcing against it, because you don't force against it. You just sort of like listen to it and you let its words flow over you.
Yeah.
For me, a lot of people have very different experiences on ayahuasca. So
yeah, no, it's great. And it's something that's lasted with me for 7 or 8 years, is those moments to be able to then, when there's pressure on, is show up differently in those things.
Right.
You know? Yeah.
Right.
Mate, I'm going to ask you a few questions. That's all right. Wrap up the show. And
let's do it.
What I wanted to ask you was, what, with everything you've learned and what you've written about and do and explored and everything, and now you're in isolation, and it might be handy for listeners, what practices are you continuing at the moment each day that are helping you through these times?
Well, it's really important to remain physical in this environment. Like right now, especially if you're locked in your apartment, you need a physical output. Remember, we are people fighting lions on the savannah, but right now we're worried about COVID, which weirdly, the only thing you can do is stay at home. We have anxiety, our businesses are falling apart. Like, we have all sorts of things that are hard. Maybe family members are sick, but there's nothing you can do. If this is getting to you, right? I mean, you're feeling anxiety. That means you're releasing these stress hormones. Exercise, like do push-ups, like literally do anything you can to modulate that. And if you can involve an emotional component to that, it's even better. For me personally, I do the Wim Hof Method every morning. I find that is very, very beneficial for me. Me and my wife wake up and we do the breathing. We do 3 rounds of it. We do the cold showers. We relax in that. I have a sauna at my house because of this journey that I've been on. So, I mean, you probably don't. I like the sauna, so that's cool. Go outside, do exercise, like by that you can do on your own, right? Lift kettlebells, throw kettlebells, with your partner who you're stuck inside with. Don't do it on your wood floors. Really just do things that have that physical output, because that's really, really important.
Yeah, no, for sure. Have you tried anything new since you've been in isolation? Brought anything new into your life?
I've tried a couple new ice cream flavors, which are cool, like a peanut butter. No, I haven't done anything new. I'm stuck in, just like everyone else, I'm stuck inside.
Well, our new thing is we're actually building a 2,000-piece jigsaw puzzle at the moment. I haven't done that since I was a kid. So that's been good.
Oh, nice.
Yeah,
nice.
Yeah.
I did a jigsaw puzzle too. It was great.
There you go. Beautiful, mate. the last thing that you kind of touched on it anyway, I'm always interested to know what people's morning routines look like. You know, so you get up, you do the Wim, you do the cold shower, move the body, and then you're into your day. But I'm assuming that's summarizing it pretty well.
Yeah, usually for me, I get to throw in a sauna at the end. I would recommend, you know, if it's right now it's snowing outside, you know,
Oh, wow.
For me, you're in Australia, so you can go outside, put your feet in the cold, do things that give you a sort of a strong sensation. That's really important. Cold showers are great because it's a strong sensation. Anything that's a strong sensation is something that your body is responding to, because every sensation your body has is about survival. Ultimately, it doesn't matter what it is. The reason that we evolved to feel things is because it's about our passing on genes in some way or another. Oftentimes, our environment makes us numb. We want things that make us not numb. That's really important.
Yeah, for sure. And last question for you, mate. With everything we've covered today, what would you like to leave our listeners to ponder on?
Oh, I mean, think about stress. What is stress the thing that you want to protect yourself from, or is stress the teacher that lets you expand? And sometimes, you know, honestly, your body is telling you something is dangerous, and sometimes things are dangerous. Like, don't go put your hand in a fire. Like, that's a stress, and that's a dangerous stress. But there's other things that are out there that are either you don't have control over, if you have, say, a politician you don't like, it doesn't matter what they're doing. You cannot control it right now, right? Unless you're a senator or, like, you know, another politician, there's nothing you can do. So not trying to be involved in that stuff is actually sort of important right now, especially for your sanity. Because, you know, oftentimes I think that, you know, and I'm guilty just like everyone else. So you go on Twitter and you get really angry and you feel like your anger should make other people, like, change their minds or something. No, it does. Human life does not work like that. Turn inside and I guess look at the world and realizing that your emotional responses and your emotional connections oftentimes are ruling your actions. And instead you should let your actions rule your emotions.
Yeah, beautiful. What a beautiful place to end it, mate. Now, your book's just been released. I'm assuming it's available everywhere. Audible as well?
So.
Do you have it on Audible?
Yeah, there's a great audiobook. I read it myself. I will, if you like the dulcet tones of my voice, you can just download it right now. The ebooks and all that stuff, I would suggest that go to my website, scottcarney.com, and you can read a sample chapter of the book for free if you subscribe to the old email list. And there's all the links to the various places the book is out. Right now, there are some, like, weird connection issues with Amazon, and some people are getting books and some people aren't. Well, there's a lot of links on my site for where you can get a book if one site's not working.
Perfect, mate. Well, I'm glad it's on Audible. I'll be buying my copy today, mate, and getting stuck in.
Love it.
I can find out what happened on your ayahuasca journey.
Yeah, right. Exactly. What did he do?
I know. Well, Scott, mate, thanks for coming on today and all that you do and getting this empowering message out there to the world. It's very needed, and I'll certainly do my bit to try and help get the word out there for you, mate. Much appreciated.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
You're welcome, Scott.